When I sold my graphene-based desalination membrane patent for $19.4 million, the view from our clifftop house in La Jolla looked like a movie. Pacific turning molten orange glass balcony catching every last smear of sunset. Rented string quartet playing somewhere behind me, while people who'd ignored my emails for years suddenly touched my arm and told me they'd always believed in me. And yet, all I remember from that night is the way my husband, Ethan, tilted a small dark bottle over my champagne flute like he was adding bitters to a cocktail. His hands steady, his face relaxed, his movements so quick and precise that if I hadn't been looking right at him, I would have missed it. 3 translucent drops slid into the gold liquid in my favorite glass, the one with a hairline crack near the stem that my father gave me when I defended my PhD, and the world narrowed down to that thin trickle of poison, threading through bubbles and light while the rest of the party continued as if nothing had shifted. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I didn't slap the glass out of his hand. I just turned away for half a second, felt my pulse hammering like it was inside my teeth, and walked straight across the living room, heels sinking a fraction into the stupid imported rug Ethan said we had to have, because success needed to look like something. Our house. My house, if we're being honest, since his startup never made a cent, was stuffed with bodies. Investors, ex-coworkers who'd laughed when I quit to work in a garage, my older brother who told me I was being irresponsible when I burned through my savings during the early prototypes, even my high school chemistry teacher who once suggested industrial lab tech as a safer path. Now every one of them had a flute in hand, and nice words suddenly lined up on their tongues like they'd been practicing them in the car. Nora, this is incredible. Nora, you've changed everything. Nora, we always knew you were destined for something like this. I threaded through them with the poison glass in my right hand and an empty one in my left, smiling so wide my cheeks ached, stopping only when I reached the most expensive parasite in the room, Ethan's mother, Deborah. She was perched on the white leather sectional like it was a throne, legs folded just so to show off her Louboutin heels, heavy diamond bracelet sliding down her wrist each time she gestured, face glistening with the kind of skincare you finance instead of buy. She'd spent 3 years telling anyone who'd listen that I was neglecting our daughter for science games and that real women knew better than to chase obsession at the expense of family. But tonight she was in full performance mode, tearful, proud, asking loudly for everyone to hear, "Isn't my Nora just brilliant?" as if she'd ever supported anything but Ethan's ego. I stopped in front of her, handed her the chipped flute, my chipped flute, and watched confusion flicker across her features. "Oh," she said, lashes fluttering as she took it. "This one's yours, darling." "You deserve it," I said, letting the words drip with just enough warmth to sound sincere. "You've been such a driving force in our lives." She liked that, of course. Nothing made Deborah happier than being framed as essential. Behind me, I heard Ethan's footsteps falter, the slight hesitating drag he had when he was trying not to look like he was rushing. I didn't turn. I just took the other flute from the tray, the safe one, and moved to the center of the room when the quartet cut out and the low buzz of conversation folded into quiet expectation. Ethan had orchestrated everything. His words, not mine. Catering, the guest list, the custom cocktails, even the lighting, because apparently my scientific achievement needed aesthetic reinforcement. At the time, I thought he was just being dramatic. Later, I realized it was staging. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the story pre-written. Brilliant scientist works herself to death, collapses during celebration, tragically leaves behind grieving husband and daughter, assets sliding neatly into his hands by way of an outdated will. He stood beside me now, navy suit tailored to make him look taller, hair styled like he had a headshot coming up, that practiced half smile on his face. If I hadn't seen the bottle, if I didn't know his consulting firm was a dumpster fire, if I hadn't already found the overdue notices, and private loan contracts shoved behind his tax folders, I might have thought he looked proud of me. "Can I have everyone's attention?" he called out, clinking his fork against his glass. Our 11-year-old daughter, Lily, was by the sliding doors, wearing the black jumpsuit I bought her because she refused to wear the frilly dress Deborah picked, her hair in a messy bun, one hand in the pocket of her hoodie because she'd thrown it on. The second I told her she could ditch the blazer, she caught my eye and made the face that meant, "These people are exhausting. Please tell me when I can go code in my room again." I gave her the slightest nod. "Almost done," I mouthed. God, I really believed that. People turned, glasses raised. I felt, more than saw, Ethan shift slightly toward the flute in my hand, like a magnet to metal, his attention locked on it even while he smiled at the crowd. "To my wife," he started, voice full and warm enough to sell soul insurance. "To the woman who turned salt water into opportunity and proved every doubter wrong." Laughter, scattered applause. My throat was dry. I lifted my flute, took the tiniest sip possible, champagne fizz biting my tongue clean, no bitterness. Deborah, never one to do anything halfway, tipped hers back for a full, greedy swallow. The room blurred at the edges as people echoed something about innovation, about the future. I lost track of the words because I was counting seconds. 10, 15, 20, 30. Ethan reached for my lower back in that possessive, camera-ready way. At 42 seconds, mid-sentence, Deborah's expression flickered. Her eyes went glassy, then enormous. One manicured hand flew to her neck. The flute slipped from her fingers, hit the hardwood, and exploded into glittering shards. The sound cut through the room. Her knees buckled. She hit the floor like someone flipped a switch. The scream that followed didn't even sound human. Someone dropped a plate. Someone shouted for an ambulance. The quartet froze mid-note. Bodies surged forward. Phones came out, half calling 911, half recording like the sick little voyeurs. People become the second tragedy enters the room. Ethan dropped to his knees beside his mother, hands fluttering uselessly over her seizing body, shouting her name over and over. "Deb! Mom! Stay with me! Stay with me!" He looked perfect, horrified, frantic, desperate. If I hadn't watched him poison that glass, I'd have believed it. Instead, I stood there, untouched by the sea of panic, my safe flute still raised, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my gums, and realized something cold and sharp. The only reason I was alive was because I'd been standing at the right angle at the right moment and happened to look. That was it. Chance, not caution, not wisdom, dumb luck. And that terrified me more than the poison ever could. By the time the paramedics forced their way through the crowd, Deborah's convulsions had slowed into limp, ragged breaths, and foam drying at the corners of her mouth, her emerald dress twisted, one heel missing. The whole thing took maybe 7 minutes. It felt like 7 hours. Ethan insisted on riding in the ambulance with her, because of course he did. Good sons don't miss their mother's potential last moments, and future widowers need to be seen caring. Our guests spilled out into the driveway like shaken ants, forming clusters of shocked faces and low murmurs. Some left quietly, unwilling to stick around. Others hovered, hungry for updates. The cops showed up just before the medical team rolled her out, asked a few perfunctory questions, took down my name as homeowner, noted the open champagne bottles in the shattered glass, then followed the ambulance down the hill. Lily was plastered to the far corner of the living room by then, eyes huge. When things finally thinned out, I went straight to her, ignoring the handful of guests still lingering. "Hey," I said, putting my hands on her shoulders. She flinched, then focused on me. "Is Grandma gonna die?" The way she said it, flat, not hopeful, not sad, just braced, sent something ugly twisting through my chest. "I don't know," I said honestly. "The doctors are going to try really hard to help her." "You didn't even cry," she added, blunt as she always was. "Everyone else freaked out. You just looked." I forced. my voice not to shake. Sometimes when bad things happen, I go quiet. My brain kind of zooms in, I guess. Doesn't mean I don't feel it. She studied my face for a long moment, like she was reviewing data. You look like you were doing math, she decided. She wasn't wrong. I got her into bed, sat with her until her breathing slowed, then went to the kitchen, rinsed my still half-full champagne flute, and opened the freezer. I'd scooped the chunks of glass and remaining poison liquid into a Ziploc bag while people were distracted, hands moving on autopilot, mind already labeling Sample 1. Now I wedged it beside the ice packs and frozen peas like it was just another thing I needed to keep cold. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at the dining table with my laptop, bank accounts open, documents spread in neat rows, the buzz of the party replaced with the tinnitus hum of the fridge and the distant crash of waves against rock. I already knew Ethan's marketing consultancy was bleeding cash. We'd had enough strained conversations about expenses, enough "this month was slow, next quarter will be better" speeches. But it wasn't until I pulled 3 years of statements into a spreadsheet that the full picture snapped into focus. Retainers that didn't renew, credit cards taken out in his name only, maxed, then paid down using balance transfers. 2 personal loans from private investors I'd never heard of, both with interest rates that should have been illegal. The second lender's name I recognized only because I'd overheard it once on speakerphone and seen the way Ethan's shoulders tightened when he realized I was in the room. Rafe. Not a bank. Not any firm I could find online. Just a man. One who didn't send polite letters when you were late. And under all of that, like a foundation wrought, a perfectly legal, perfectly airtight prenuptial agreement I'd signed 10 years ago. Back when my only asset was the first provisional filing on my decile membrane, and Ethan had been the one with savings. It said what most prenups say when a lawyer's actually competent: what's mine is mine. What's his is his. Marital property split along standard lines. No claims on IP or future inventions. At the time, it felt fair. We were in love, and I believed I'd never have to look at those pages again. But sitting there now, highlighted notes glowing on my screen, I saw the problem. In a divorce, he'd get half the house equity, half the joint account, maybe some support for a couple years. He would not touch the patent proceeds. He would not touch the future royalties. But if I died as his legal spouse, my will, drafted 5 years ago in a rush after Lily almost choked on a grape and I realized I didn't have anything in place, left everything to him, with a trust for Lily managed by him until she turned 25. The estate attorney had even smiled and said, "Standard setup, very common for young families. Common and idiotic." If I'd updated it after my valuation came back, if I'd listened to the little voice that said, "You should separate this," maybe Ethan would have had to settle for screwing me over emotionally instead of calculating my death like a line item. "You really signed your own death warrant," I muttered to myself, disgusted. Somewhere around 4 a.m., my eyes burning, I called the only person I trusted with both nuance and aggression. My patent lawyer, now friend, now maybe the only reason I'd be alive a month from now. "It's 4 a.m, Aaron answered, voice a little hoarse but awake. This better not be about a minor licensing clause. "Ethan tried to kill me," I said. No easing in, no preamble. The words dropped between us like a stone. Silence. Then, "Tell me exactly what you saw." I told her everything. The vial, the drops, the glass, the swap, Deborah, the ambulance, the debts, the prenup, the will. She didn't once say, "Are you sure?" She didn't once tell me I was overreacting. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said, and her voice had that clipped, surgical edge it only got when she smelled blood. "Listen carefully, because we don't have the luxury of you being sloppy about this. First, we lock down your mind. Then we lock down your money. Then we build a cage." "My mind? You're worth almost $20 million now." That makes you a target for guardianship games. If poison doesn't work, the next play is, she's unstable, she needs help, sign here, I'll take care of things. You're going to see a neuropsych specialist today. I'll arrange it. Full competency evaluation, thoroughly documented. Then, we call an estate planner and rewrite your entire structure, so if you die, not 1 cent passes through Ethan's hands directly. Not one. And while that's in motion, you act like you know nothing. No accusations, no scenes, no dramatic midnight confrontations in the kitchen. You hear me, Nora? You are a lab rat that knows it's in a maze. You watch and you collect data. I close my eyes. I wanted to scream at Ethan, smash his laptop, throw that freezer bag at his head and watch him flinch. Instead, I said, "Okay." "Good," Aaron replied. "One more thing. Keep that glass frozen. Don't touch it again. Don't tell anyone. If we're lucky, that's our smoking gun. If we're not, we still bury him in everything else." Ethan texted from the hospital around 7 a.m. A photo of Deborah unconscious in a dim ICU room, oxygen mask strapped to her face, machines sprouting from her like metal vines. "They don't know what it is yet," he wrote. "Toxin, maybe. Please come when you can." He added a crying emoji, because nothing says genuine grief like stock graphics. I told him I had to clear something with my legal team about the patent sale, and that I'd come by later with fresh clothes for him. I took Lily to school, watching her study me in the rearview mirror like she was trying to fit me into a different equation. "Is Dad okay?" she asked. "He's scared," I said. "It's hard watching someone you love get sick suddenly." "Are you scared?" "Yeah," I said, "of the wrong person." After I dropped her off, I drove straight to a sleek medical building in Sorrento Valley, where Aaron had booked an emergency appointment with a neuropsychologist who apparently did nothing but capacity evaluations and high-end athlete concussion baselines. 4 hours of memory tests, pattern games, drawing clocks, explaining proverbs, listing as many words as I could that started with a certain letter in 60 seconds, tracking changing sequences on a screen until my eyes watered. It felt like sitting for the world's most boring, high-stakes exam. At the end, the doctor, mid-50s, silver hair, bored but competent, looked at me over her glasses and said, "You're fine. Better than fine, actually. Strong executive function, no cognitive impairment, no signs of delusion or psychosis. I'll have the full report notarized and sent to your attorney today." One brick in place. Next came the bank. Aaron met me there. Crisp suit, no nonsense, and we opened a new account in a smaller institution under a separate trust name. We put exactly $100 into it. That was all. Then we drafted a power of attorney document that granted Ethan access only to that account, with wording so dense and specific I had to read it 3 times to understand it. Everything else, my main checking, my brokerage, the patent payout sitting in escrow, was barricaded with fraud alerts and dual authorization locks that required Aaron's sign-off. The last step that day was surreal, watching a security tech team put cameras in my own house while I smiled at Ethan and told him it was, for peace of mind, now that we're in the news. "It's probably overkill," he said, but his jaw clenched when the installer mentioned cloud backups, which told me everything I needed to know about what he was planning next. The cameras we placed weren't just by the doors and windows. They were in the kitchen, over the stove and sink, in my office aimed at the filing cabinet, in the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Carefully chosen angles. Aaron's idea. "We're not just protecting you," she'd said. "We're collecting proof if he moves again." That night, after Ethan came home from the hospital with a story about mysterious plant-based toxins, and the doctors are stumped, I went into my office and did exactly what prey isn't supposed to do. I left bait. A green folder in the second drawer labeled Estate Confidential. Inside were duplicate copies of the fake power of attorney, a fake summary of my primary assets, and a neatly typed page of login credentials to a brokerage portal that wasn't real, The website behind it looked identical to my actual one. Same logo, same layout. But it lived on a server controlled by Aaron's techs and did nothing but log every keystroke, IP, device fingerprint, and transfer attempt. All I had to do now was wait and pretend I didn't know my husband wanted me dead. Ethan came home late, smelling like hospital air and expensive hand soap, with a stiffness in his shoulders that would have read as nerves to anyone else. We ate dinner in front of the TV. He picked at his food, kept glancing at his phone. At one point, he looked at me too long, like he was trying to decide whether I already knew something I shouldn't. "You okay?" he finally asked. "You look distant." "Just tired," I said, forcing a weak laugh, "and thinking about everything we have to do now. Estate stuff, taxes, planning. It's a lot." That lit something behind his eyes. Interest. "Funny you say that," he replied. "I was actually going to suggest we look at our estate documents together this week. Make sure everything's, in order. For Lily. If anything ever happened..." I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. If the poison didn't work, control the paperwork. "That's smart," I said smoothly. "Maybe I'll ask Aaron to pull everything so I can take a look." "Yeah, sure," he said quickly, too quickly. "We don't need to bother her for all the little details yet, though. Maybe we just review it ourselves first." He watched me as he said it like he was testing my resistance. If I'd pushed back, if I'd said, "No, we wait," maybe he would have changed tactics. Instead, I just nodded. Maybe. At 10:53 p.m., after he told me he was going to answer a couple emails in the living room, I lay in the guest room. My excuse was that I didn't want to disturb him with my tossing after the hospital shock, and opened the camera feed on my phone. At 11:09 p.m., the indicator for my office turned from blue to red. Motion detected. I switched to that view. There he was. Ethan slipped in, wearing the soft t-shirt and pajama pants he knew I liked. Like he wanted to look harmless, even to empty rooms. He went straight to the filing cabinet, didn't even bother rifling through other drawers first, just popped open the one with my label maker's neat EH sticker, and paused when his eyes landed on the green folder. Of course he did. Predators have instincts too. He pulled it out, glanced back at the door once, then opened it and started snapping photos with his phone. Every page, every signature, every login and account balance I'd carefully fictionalized. His expression shifted as he went. Curiosity into focus, into greedy satisfaction. It was all there, or so he thought. A master password, an account worth 7.8 pointers, a note that funds would be consolidated soon into that primary brokerage. I watched him soak it in, watched him greedily catalog the future he thought he could carve out of my corpse. When he was done, he put the folder back exactly where he'd found it, as if that would erase the fact that his betrayal had just been recorded in 4K from 3 different angles. Then he sat at my desk, pulled out his laptop, and typed in the URL from the page. The honeypot portal loaded. I watched his shoulders relax with recognition. Same brand colors, same header text as the real thing. He entered the username and password from the fake sheet. The site loaded his supposed dashboard. Clean interface, big number at the top, $7.8 million. That number wasn't real, but the way his pupils dilated at it sure as hell was. He clicked through fake holdings, fake positions, fake everything. We'd intentionally made it look like someone who'd let their money sit passively, which is exactly how he saw me. Smart enough to earn it, too busy to actively manage it. Then he went to the transfer tab. The honeypot logged everything. He input his own bank info, account ending 5612, which I'd seen a dozen times on our joint statements, then tried to send $9,500, small enough to avoid automatic flags in his mind, big enough to feel like progress. When that failed, the site gave him a generic processing error. He tried again for $4,000, then $3,000. Each time the system pretended to choke while it quietly captured the evidence that would one day be projected on a courtroom screen. Finally, he snapped his laptop closed, rubbed his face, and stalked out of my office. I lay there in the dark, phone screen cold against my palm, and felt something ugly and deep settle into place. Not vindication, not relief, but a deadened kind of hate for the man sleeping under the same roof as my daughter. Not because he'd tried to kill me, that almost felt abstract, but because he'd reduced me to a calculation, a ledger entry, a problem of access to be solved. The next morning, Aaron and Detective Bishop sat at my kitchen table like a 2-person task force. Bishop was smaller than I expected, hair pulled into a severe bun, plain blazer, eyes that missed nothing. I gave them the frozen glass, the video, the honeypot logs, the competency report, everything. Bishop's pen flew over her notebook. "We don't get packages this clean very often," she admitted. "Motive, opportunity, documented attempt. It's good work." It didn't feel like work. It felt like trying not to drown with a lab notebook in my teeth. They left with evidence bags and a plan. There would be warrants. There would be subpoenas. There would be an eventual arrest. But this wasn't some TV drama. Nothing moved at the speed my fear wanted. Days crawled. Deborah regained partial consciousness, disoriented but alive, and Ethan spun a story to anyone who would listen about a tainted bottle and possible sabotage by someone who didn't like our success. I watched him on my own security feeds when I wasn't in the room. Watched him pace, watched him stare at the balcony, watched him stand over Lily's door, some nights a second too long. The bank meeting, when it came, was framed as estate planning, just like in Aaron's scenario. Ethan invited his mother, still fragile but milking the drama, his lender friend, who turned out to be an angular man with a shark's smile named Rafe, and a representative from a private care facility specializing in executive burnout. The plan was clear. If the murder and the fraud both failed, paint me as unstable and tuck me away behind locked doors, accessing my money on my behalf. We walked into a downtown conference room with glass walls and fake plants, and for a moment it felt like everything was going exactly to script. The bank manager confirmed my decoy account held a minimal balance. Ethan's face flickered. The cops stepped in. Ethan was arrested. Deborah sobbed. Rafe glared like he was already calculating other ways to get paid. It would have been the perfect turning point in a neat story, except life doesn't care about neat. A week after Ethan's arrest, after the story hit a couple legal blogs and got picked up by a local station hungry for science star nearly poisoned by husband, Deborah hired a lawyer whose specialty was reputational arson. A woman named Kaylee Shore, young, gorgeous, absolutely ruthless. She moved fast. Before the DA had even finished cataloging everything from my hard drives, Kaylee started seeding a different version of the story. An ambitious woman cracking under pressure, a lab environment full of toxic fumes, a family strained by her obsession, a husband desperately trying to help. She found old texts I'd sent in darker moments, messages to a friend saying, "I'm losing my mind," jokes about drinking bleach after a failed experiment, and yanked them out of context. She got Deborah on camera, frail and glassy-eyed, talking about how I poured a drink for me, insisted I take it, how I always hated being challenged, how our arguments had gotten more intense as the patent sale approached. By the time we hit pretrial hearings, there were 3 narratives fighting for dominance. The state's version, Ethan attempted to kill me for money. Mine, I saw what he did and trapped him. And theirs, I poisoned Deborah in a fit of stress and constructed an elaborate digital framing of Ethan when I realized the toxin hadn't hit the right target. It would have been laughable if it hadn't started to work. Kaylee subpoenaed my therapy records from grad school, brought up my brief stint on antidepressants, asked pointed questions about sleep deprivation and hallucinations induced by stress. She hinted to the court that a hyper-intelligent, high-achieving mind can also fracture spectacularly under strain. The judge denied her motion to throw out the prosecution's case entirely, but she chipped away at it, edge by edge. "Why?" she asked one afternoon, pacing in front of the hearing room. "Did Dr. Halpern not call 911 immediately when she claims to have seen her husband introduce a toxin? Why did she instead choose to give the allegedly poisoned glass to her mother-in-law?" "Ladies and gentlemen," a normal person would shout, would knock the drink away. A calculating person with malice might do something else. My lawyer objected. The judge sustained. The question still hung in the air like smoke. They tore the honeypot apart next. "So you and your attorney created a fake website to lure your husband into committing a crime?" Kaylee asked, eyebrow raised. "Is that correct?" "We created a system to document what he was already attempting," I said through clenched teeth. "Yes or no, Dr. Halpern?" "Yes." "And you admit you left papers out in an unlocked cabinet where you suspected he would snoop?" "I knew he would snoop," I said. "Exactly," she purred, turning to the judge. "She staged it. She created the entire scenario." The DA tried to counter that staging an opportunity to commit fraud didn't retroactively create murderous intent, that the poison came first, that the glass was real. But the lab had a problem. They'd confirmed a neurotoxin in the sample I preserved, but the defense's experts argued the chain of custody was contaminated, that I'd handled the glass myself, that there was no direct video of Ethan dropping anything into that flute. There was footage of him at the bar, sure, but the camera angle didn't catch the vial clearly enough for a jury to see. And every time I pointed out the smoothness of his movements, the timing of his glances, the way he hovered, Kaylee circled back to my hyper-vigilance and the fact that I'd been awake for 30 hours when I made some of my first statements. They made my competence evaluation a weapon, too. "Isn't it true," she asked the specialist, "that these tests can be coached? That a highly intelligent person could train themselves to perform well? And that anxiety can sometimes present as cognitive sharpness rather than decline?" The doctor pushed back, but doubt crept in. It always does. The worst hit came from a direction I didn't anticipate. Ray flipped. Of course. Men like him always cut deals when the water gets too hot. He told investigators about Ethan's debts, about his panicked late-night calls, about mentions of, "This will all be solved when Nora's money lands." It should have strengthened the case. Instead, Kaylee twisted it. "So you continued to lend to him," she emphasized on cross. "You encouraged his delusions of quick fixes. You profited off his anxiety. And now you expect this court to believe you were the moral compass?" By the time we reached trial, Ethan looked thinner, paler, perfectly tragic in a tailored suit. I looked, according to one tabloid, cold and clinical, the embodiment of weaponized intellect. As if that were a crime. Lily didn't testify, thank God. I refused to let them drag her in. She watched some of the coverage, though. Kids always see more than you want them to. One night she stood in my doorway and asked, "Did you really give Grandma the glass on purpose?" I wanted to explain everything, every nuance, every second in my head between seeing the drops fall and making the choice I made. Instead, I said, "I made a decision when I was scared. I'm not proud of how it looked, but I'm proud I'm still alive to be your mom." She stared at me for a long time, then went back to her room without replying. The verdict didn't come clean. The jury hung on the attempted murder charge. Too much reasonable doubt, they said later, in anonymous interviews. They couldn't all agree they saw what I saw. They did, however, convict Ethan on the financial crimes. Attempted wire fraud, identity theft, falsifying documents. He got 5 years. 5. For trying to loot my accounts after I was dead in his head. The DA's office decided not to retry the murder count. Resources, they said. We got some measure of justice, they said. As if 5 years in a minimum security facility where he could finish his MBA online and hit the gym every day was justice. Deborah walked out of that courtroom with her pearls on straight, gave a statement about forgiving my son for his mistakes and hoping Nora finds peace and help. That last word hung there, sticky. Help. A month later, while I was still running on caffeine and spite, letters started arriving. One from a concerned citizen who was worried about Lily's environment. One from a court-appointed guardian ad litem assigned after Deborah filed for grandparent visitation rights and slid in a line about potential emotional instability on my part. One from an insurance company flagging my life policy because of the ongoing legal situation. It didn't stop. When you become a story, everyone thinks they get to write your ending. The darkest twist came a year later, on a Tuesday, so ordinary it hurt. I was at my lab space, a small facility I'd rented to keep consulting and testing new variations of my membrane tech, running brine samples, headphones on, when my phone buzzed with 3 notifications at once. One from the home security app, one from Lily's school, one from an unknown number. The school voicemail was short and careful. "Hi, Dr. Halpern. This is Principal Vega. We've had a call from your mother-in-law regarding some concerns about Lily's well-being. We're obligated to follow up. Please call me back." The security notification was worse. Motion detected, front door. Then 5 minutes later, motion detected, living room. Then, audio alert triggered. I opened the live feed and watched from 30 miles away as 2 people in plain clothes but official posture stepped into my house behind Deborah. A man and a woman, both carrying folders. My stomach dropped. I called Erin. She didn't answer on the first ring. When she picked up on the second, I didn't bother being calm. "They're in my house," I said. "CPS, or whoever the California equivalent is. She did it. She's actually doing it." Erin swore quietly. "I'll head there now. Don't go home alone. Wait for me, and we go together." By the time we arrived, Lily was sitting at the dining table, shoulders tight, eyes red but not crying. Deborah hovered in the corner like she was the one being wronged. The woman with the folder introduced herself as a social worker. She used gentle, rehearsed language about concerns, reports, temporary assessments. The words blurred. I heard phrases like exposure to ongoing legal conflict and questionable judgment in past high-stakes situations and allegations of retaliatory behavior. When she mentioned the glass, the one I handed Deborah that night, I realized exactly where this was heading. "So because I didn't martyr myself neatly enough, I'm an unfit mother?" I snapped. Erin put a hand on my arm, a subtle warning. The social worker's expression didn't change. "No one is saying that. We just have to ensure Lily is in a stable, non-threatening environment while we complete our evaluation." "With who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your mother-in-law has offered to take temporary placement if necessary." Deborah pressed a tissue to her lips, eyes shining. "Just until everything settles, Nora. You clearly have so much on your plate. I only want what's best for my granddaughter." They had paperwork, court orders. Judges love erring on the side of caution when there's any whiff of danger to a child, even if that danger is manufactured by people with better lawyers. Erin argued, hard. She referenced my clean record, my capacity evaluations, Lily's own school reports, my lack of any actual charges against her. It didn't matter. The story had already done its work. The social worker explained in that careful, infuriatingly gentle tone that Lily would be staying with Deborah for a little while they sorted out fact from allegation. "Bullshit," Lily said suddenly, voice cracking. Everyone turned. "I want to stay with my mom. Grandma's lying. She always lies when she doesn't get what she wants." It should have helped. It probably did on some level, in some report, but not enough. I watched my daughter pack a bag under supervision, watched Deborah put on a performance of reluctant martyrdom, watched the car pull away with Lily in the back seat, staring at me through the glass, with a hatred I knew wasn't for me, but felt like it anyway. Hatred for the entire mess, the adults who'd turned her life into a chessboard. Ethan called me from prison 2 days later. He wasn't supposed to, but he found a way. "You're losing it all," he said softly, almost lovingly. "You did this. If you'd just let things run their course. If I'd just died, you mean, I cut in. Save the poetry. He laughed then, low and humorless. You're not dead, Nora. You're worse. You're crazy on paper. That's harder to come back from. I hung up before I could scream. Then I sat on my kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, and let the quiet swallow me whole. The money stayed mine. The trust structures held. Legally, I was still wealthy. Scientifically, I was still brilliant. Practically, I was a woman alone in a house wired like a crime scene, whose kids slept in a guest room at the home of the woman who raised a man who tried to kill me. Over the following months, I fought like hell. Aaron filed motions, counter-motions, petitions. We attacked every lie, presented every evaluation, every teacher letter, every therapist note. Eventually, the state relented, not because they admitted they were wrong, but because their caseload was overloaded and no one could point to any actual harm I'd done. Lily came home after 6 months. She was taller, quieter, more careful with me. Grandma says you're dangerous when you're cornered, she told me once. Grandma doesn't know the difference between dangerous and refusing to roll over, I replied. You'll learn that, if you're lucky. Ethan gets out in 3 years if he behaves. He writes letters from time to time, all of which go straight into a box I never open but can't make myself burn, because that would feel like admitting none of it ever mattered. Deborah still sees Lily on supervised visits, in public places where we're all forced to pretend this is a functional family dynamic. Every now and then, a stranger recognizes me from some old article about the case. Science star, almost slain, and I can feel them trying to decide which version they believe. The genius survivor or the cold woman who handed her enemy the poison. Here's the sick punchline. I don't even know which one I am anymore. Some nights, I stand at the glass balcony where this all started, ocean wind ripping at my hair, and I replay that moment in my head like a slowed-down experiment. Ethan's hand, the drops, the glass, Deborah's eyes when I offered it to her. Could I have handled it differently? Absolutely. Would I be alive if I had? I don't know. What I do know is this. They tried to turn me into a victim, and I refused. They tried to make me disappear, through poison, through paperwork, through narrative, and I'm still here. But survival isn't neat. It doesn't always end with the bad guy in a cage and the good guy on a beach, healed. Sometimes the bad guy gets a light sentence and walks out into the sun, still convinced you ruined his life by not dying as planned. Sometimes the system quietly brands you high conflict and concerning, little labels that stick to you longer than any court ruling. Sometimes your victory is just continued existence in a world eager to believe a lie that fits better than the truth. And the darkest part, if you ask most people who really destroyed this family, Ethan with his vial, or me with my trap, they wouldn't say his name. They'd say mine. That's the joke. That's the horror. That's the price of seeing clearly and still choosing yourself.